Hi, everybody. It's Ruth Rumack here. Thank you for your patience. I had a little technical difficulty getting online, but here I am. I'm very excited to be here with you tonight to talk about executive functions. Very exciting. I'm going to ask Joelle, who is our trusted AT. She's actually our outreach person, but she does all my clicking during the evening so I can monitor the chat. She's going to share her screen and we are going to get started. I can see from the chat that we've got a whole range of ages and stages. A lot of people from the Toronto District School Board or the Toronto Catholic District School Board, all sorts of places in the city and around the city. And if you're not from Toronto, that's great too. Glad to have you here. Just so that you know, my name is Ruth Rumack. I am the founder and executive director of education at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space, and we are an academic support different approach to education, different than the school system and different than most tutoring companies, which we don't consider ourselves. We are academic support and we really look at the whole child. We program specifically for their needs, whether they come with a diagnosis, an LD, ADHD, ASD, giftedness, or a multitude combination, multiple exceptionalities, or no diagnosis at all. And we have a very multisensory, hands-on, active approach, both in our in-person lessons and in our virtual lessons. So that's a little bit about us, a little bit more about us as we go on into the evening. And let's take a look at the next slide. Why are we here? Well, we're here to talk about executive function. We all know about executive functions is, well, maybe we don't all know. That's why we're here. Executive functions are the things that allow us to get stuff done. A lot of people think about the executive functions as the master controller or the conductor of an orchestra. Those functions allow us to get all the pieces together in order to move forward with a plan or a task or even a behavior. So we've got a lovely picture of the different executive functions, but I like to break them up between thinking executive functions and doing executive functions. And the thinking executive functions include things like working memory. I'm going to go to my notes for this one. Inhibition, planning and prioritization, organization, time management, persistence and flexibility, sequencing thoughts and information, multi-step tasks, and metacognition. Of course, this is the thinking about your thinking. And the doing executive functions include things like our responses, our emotional control, our sustained attention, again, task initiation, and our goal-directed behavior. So knowing the difference between the thinking and the doing executive functions helps us to separate them and tackle them in slightly different ways. But of course, they all work together. And in order to get a task done, we often have to use many executive functions in order to start something, keep our attention, and follow it through to completion. All right, let's look at the next slide. So when somebody's executive functions are working, we probably don't really pay attention to that. Or we may think about somebody and say, wow, they're really on the ball. They've got it all together. But what do weak executive functions look like? And these are things that you will see in students or individuals who do have learning challenges, who may have ADHD, anxiety, dysgraphia, which is issues with fine motor control. And generally, we see executive functioning challenges in this population because of all of the little pieces that are involved in the executive functions and allowing us to get through a task and get to the other side. So what does it look like? Well, it could look like somebody who has trouble keeping track of their things, like, for example, losing a winter coat in the middle of winter. You'd think, how could somebody lose their winter coat? But I can't tell you the number of kids that I've known who come home at the end of the day wearing their t-shirt and nothing else. Where did it go? I don't know. One kid said, I threw it up in the air and it didn't come back down. True story. I think actually that was my husband. I have a feeling that might have been my husband when he was a kid. Um, what else does it look like? It looks like losing track of homework, assignments, due dates, not being prepared for tests because you've forgotten what you're supposed to study. It might look like not knowing how to get started, losing focus in the middle, or not being able to follow a task all the way through to the end. Following a routine may be challenging for someone with executive function challenges. That's a challenging word to say in and of itself. Also, not remembering the details of a story, or not being able to recall a story in sequential order, or finding the words to recall an event in sequential order. All of these things can culminate and can be very frustrating. And of course, that emotional regulation and inhibition control is also a major factor of executive functions. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Moving on. So I want to introduce you to our executive functions coordinator, Jessica Levy. She's one of our teachers, lovely, lovely young lady. I don't know how old she is, I can't say that, but really, really passionate about what she does. I had the opportunity to sit down with her and have a conversation, a discussion with her about executive functions. I'm going to share a little snippet of that conversation, and then we will be sending that out as part of our handout to you when the evening is finished, and we'll send that out in a couple of days. So let's take a look. Oh, we need sound. I'm not sure why the sound isn't working. All right, maybe we won't be able to get the sound. No, we can get it with closed captions. All right, let's stop that for now. We'll figure it out. If we have time, we'll bring it back later, but you are going to get a copy of it. I can summarize for you. What she was talking about was the fact that I asked her, what are some of the common things that we see at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space that are challenges for our kids with executive functioning challenges? And she was saying that in the younger kids, it's really about that ability to control the emotions, to sustain attention, and to get through a task. And that comes in many various forms. Of course, as a child gets older, it's really about that planning and prioritizing and staying on top of the work. So we're going to have lots of details about that in our evening coming up, as well as some other exciting things that I'm going to share with you. And I'm going to ask for a little bit of participation too. So you may be asked to put a few things in the chat as we go along. Don't be shy. The more, the merrier. And it just keeps things moving for us too. All right, let's look at the next one. What are we talking about next? Keep moving. All right, the development of executive functions. Where do these functions take place in the brain? They take place in the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. And this happens to be where you would find memory, language, controlling your behavior, and all of those executive functions that we mentioned before, all the thinking ones and all the doing ones. The interesting thing about this, and anyone who's interested in brain science, is that the frontal lobe is the last part of the brain to develop. And it is not fully developed until the age 25 or later. And we find that in students or in individuals with ADHD, that is even more delayed. And we find that even though a student or an individual can learn the skills as they go along, it takes a very long time. It's a process. It takes patience, it takes persistence, and it takes consistency. So the beautiful thing about executive functions is that they are a learned skill, which means that if we don't have them at one point in our lives, there is still hope, and we can still practice these skills and build our skill repertoire as we age and as we mature. And it doesn't stop at 25 or 28, but we can continue to grow our executive functioning skills throughout our lifetime. I was just reading a study actually that was talking about the fact that if you take on a new challenge, if you learn a new language or start a new hobby or take a dance class or do something that's challenging to you but not too challenging that you feel that you can't do it. It's just in that sweet spot of challenge without being overly frustrating that actually builds executive functioning skills at any age. So there's hope for all of us, for sure. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Okay, we're going to take a moment here. And take a moment means that I'm going to ask you something. So what do I want to ask you? I would like to ask you, what are some of the things, you can throw it in the chat, that you may have struggled with as a teenager, as a young adult, or as a kid? What are some of the executive functioning areas, or maybe they're still a challenge to you now? What are some things that were like, oh yeah, that was always tough? Think about that for a moment. And if you can throw it in the chat, I will share some of those answers. What have we got? Focus while reading. Yes. Procrastination. Oh, I'm a big knower of that one. Being on time. Yep. Calendarizing. I love that. Putting things on the calendar. Procrastination for sure. My whole life. Cameron says procrastination and being on time, lack of focus, getting started on my homework. Oh my goodness. You guys, you know it. Organization. We hear deadlines from Amanda. I totally get it. And I empathize with all of those. I've experienced all of those myself. Even though perfectionism, oh, Lisa says perfectionism. And you know what? All of these things are part of executive functions. And all of these things, as I was saying, are skills that we can learn. So the good news is that we can start to break them down and teach these little things in a small, consistent way that will amount to a lot of learning over time. All right, let's go back to our presentation. So let's talk about the ages and the stages. What do executive functions look like at different ages and different stages of life? Well, a preschooler should be able to put their toys back where they belong if they've been told where to put them. They should be able to understand and recall instructions, simple instructions, especially about safety. They should be able to play with a partner, some interactive play. When a preschooler has executive functioning challenges, and we can see these things as early as age 2 or 3 or 4, they're going to have trouble following instructions that have been explicit. They are going to be easily frustrated, maybe throw things or have tantrums. They may act out aggressively. These are things that we can't, of course, diagnose a preschooler just because they're acting out or they're being aggressive, that they've got EF function problems, because of course that's natural to that age as well. But what we're looking for is more than typical, where it's something that is really, it's a pervasive problem that you're seeing in many different situations. You're seeing the same problem in different situations over that child's life or events of life. So let's talk about kindergarten. Kindergarten to grade 2, that early primary age group. They should be able to follow a 2 or 3 step task. So go get your coat, put it on, and meet me at the door. 3 steps. They should be able to dress independently. They should enjoy playing with other kids, and their play should be more conversational. The memory part of remembering what they're doing or what they're supposed to do should be there. When a child in those early primary years has executive functioning challenges, it may show up as putting up your hand, and then by the time the teacher gets to you, you don't know what you're supposed to say, or having a tantrum or being very sensitive over minor things that shouldn't upset the child generally. Also panicking when a routine changes. That's that inflexibility that we might see in somebody with executive function challenge. Let's take a look at the next age group. So grades 3 to 5, this is when our academic life starts to get a little bit more heavy, where there are higher expectations on us and more expectations for independent work as well. So a typical executive function would look like reading and following a novel, a chapter book, being able to understand, follow the plot and relate to the characters and know what they are doing in sequence, being able to work on a longer project and sustain their attention to get from beginning, middle, and through to the end and handing it in. And when we see students in this age range who are struggling with their executive functions, it's going to look like starting a task and not finishing it, or not being able to follow the sequence of the novel because the order of events are all mixed up, or answering a question incorrectly because they don't understand the details of the question itself. My favorite is as the piles of paper start to fill up in the backpack, that when you open up that backpack, it's just an explosion. And I have to say, when we talk about organization later on tonight, it comes to mind so many kids' backpacks. They'll come bring their backpack in, we'll dump it out, and we'll find things. I have found tennis balls, dirty socks, lunches from weeks and weeks ago, and treasures that as soon as we empty the backpack, the child says, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know where that was. I'm so glad you found that." So there are definite rewards to putting some of these practices into place too. Okay, let's talk about grades 6 to 8. That is middle school. And middle school, again, we're raising the bar academically where there are higher expectations. We should be able to perform multi-step math problems, computational problems, and word problems, and keep track of where we are in the process. We should be able to keep track of our homework and our material and our assignments. And we're also starting to think more logically and more deeply about things as well. So somebody with an EF challenge will have a hard time starting a big assignment. They may not know where to start. It may cause a lot of anxiety. It may cause procrastination, as we heard from the chat before. It may cause stress. It may cause a meltdown. It may cause heightened emotions or aggressive behavior. And one of the things we want to keep in mind about executive functions is that it also looks at our emotional output and our behavior. So when somebody doesn't take responsibility or isn't able to take responsibility for their own actions, or blames other people or other circumstances for things that they should be taking responsibility for, can be a sign of an executive functioning problem as well. All right, let's look at the next grade level. I'm moving through this quickly because I want to make sure that we get to all the hands-on tips and tricks that we've got in store for you as well. But I think it's important that you have an understanding of sort of what's typical at a certain age range and what is outside of that typical range. So when we get to high school, grades 9 to 12, of course, that workload bumps up even further as a student is responsible for planning their own time, managing their own time, getting their assignments in on time and on their own. And this is where the metacognition is also refined. And metacognition refers to thinking about our thinking, our ability to self-reflect. And the ability to self-reflect is a huge part of learning executive functioning skills. And I'm going to mention it many times over this evening. It's about understanding what we've done. Did it work? Didn't it work? How can we tweak it for next time? And then again, reflect on it for the next round to make adjustments and make something work better for us. So in high school, some of the challenges that we see will be perhaps not finishing a test on time because their working memory is challenged and it's hard to recall the facts in a set time frame, or the anxiety has built and therefore the test anxiety really creeps in and it's difficult to stay focused and finish the test because of worry or blank mind or just getting overwhelmed. We also might see in this age range impulsive and perhaps risky behavior. And that's something that, of course, changes with maturity. But if it's something that we're seeing in a pervasive way, we're seeing it come up in many aspects of life, it's something that we definitely want to address. All right, let's talk about the last age range, which is 18 plus, moving into adulthood. We're expecting our young adults to be able to go on to post-secondary or to get a job, to be able to hold a job, to be able to be on time for that job, get their tasks done, stay on task and finish them, hand them in at the end. And also to be able to reflect on their own moods and emotions and keep those in check when necessary. So somebody who's struggling in those areas will have difficulty managing time and being on time and remembering when things are due or where they're supposed to be, misplacing possessions, and difficulty monitoring those emotions and understanding, what is appropriate behavior in certain realms. All right, let's look at the next slide. So what do we do? How do we get there? How do we get our kids and our students from intense support where they need a lot of hand holding and a lot of modeling and a lot of spoon feeding in some cases, to independence. That's the goal. We want our kids to be independent, but it doesn't happen overnight. And when we are working with students or our children who have executive functioning challenges, it is a long process. And I want to say to you who is dealing with this at home or in your workplace, we need to take a deep breath and let it out when we're working with students who have executive functioning challenges. Some of us may have them ourselves, and sometimes it's very difficult to see our children exhibiting the same behaviors or having the same issues that we had when we were younger or that we still deal with today. So I want to remind you that it's a process, and that if you do believe in growth mindset, which I do very strongly, that's the belief that you may not have the skill yet, but it will come, and it will come over time. And as I mentioned before, it's a process, and it takes patience, and it takes persistence, and it takes consistency. Those are the three things I want to keep reminding you of, because when you're in the middle of it and you have told your kid the same thing 5 times and they're still not listening, or they are melting down themselves, or they haven't brought the right homework home because they forgot that they have a test tomorrow, we all just need to take a breath and take a step back and remember that this is really a challenge for them, that it's not laziness and it's not lack of motivation. It's actually a lack of prefrontal cortex maturity. And so we've got to give them the steps to get there. So how do we do that? We want to start with explicit instructions. So if you're going to tell your 8-year-old, go and clean your room, it's a mess, we have to be very clear and model and practice the steps of what does it mean to have a clean room? How can we help them? How can we support them and demonstrate what a clean room looks like or should look like? Well, we could do things like having a bin for all the Lego, and it has a picture of the Lego on it, or it has the word Lego on it, and that's the place that the Lego lives. Or it could mean having, all your tools on the desk drawn with an outline so that everybody knows where to put back the scissors, where to put back the tape, where to put back the hole puncher, so that everything has a home and everything knows where it goes back. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have to keep our cool, as I said before, because we want to model what that desired behavior looks like. And if we are getting frustrated every time we go into, let's say, our daughter's room, who's 12 years old, and there's another mess on the floor, like I swear she cleaned it up 2 days ago, but it's back, it grew again, we have to give them the tools so that they can do it themselves. So explicit instruction is number 1. Second step is guided practice and feedback, and lots of positive feedback. I love the way that you hung up your coat as soon as you came in the door. I love that you put your backpack, in the cubby that is marked with your name so that you know where it is tomorrow morning. And that kind of evaluating, or that kind of praise, definitely breeds success and it breeds confidence. But it also, we also want to make sure that the child has the ability to self-reflect. And that's the idea of metacognition, of thinking about your thinking. So if the backpack doesn't go back in its cubby at the end of the day, it makes it really difficult for us to leave in the morning because it's hard to find your backpack. So what could we do tonight to make it easier for tomorrow morning? And then when tomorrow morning happens and they have their backpack where it's supposed to be, wow, this is great. You've got your backpack, you know where it is, let's get out the door. So the guided practice and the feedback and allowing our kids to think about their thinking, reflect on how they did, and figure out how to make it better for themselves for next time is really, really important. We'll be talking about that throughout the evening. Then we get to independence. And independence is after we've given explicit instructions and we've guided their practice and we've praised them and we've given them the feedback and we've reflected and we've tweaked. Now, after many, many trials, the student is able to take that responsibility for themselves. And that's why I call this the gradual release of responsibility, because we have to do it over time and we have to do it in a way that doesn't just throw the instructions at the kid and then turn around, we walk away and expect them to do it. All right. let's move on to the next one. So here's another take a moment. Let's take a moment and think about one area that you would like to see improvement in your child's or your own executive functioning. So what is one area? We don't want to be too big, because if we're too broad, then it doesn't help us stay focused. So what is one area that you would like either to make some changes for your child or for yourself? Carrie says, getting started on my homework. That's great. So we're going to talk about that, Carrie. That's this idea of task initiation, getting something started. Excellent. Anybody else have a wish list? Like if they could wave a magic wand and something would change instantly, what would it be for either your kids or yourselves? Anybody have anything? I know, I think in my house, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, it's getting out the door in the morning. No matter how early we wake up, it seems like it's that last 10 minutes that's always tricky. That's when tempers flare. That's when things get frustrating. That's what happens in my house, I would have to say. Okay, so let's look at the next one. If anyone wants to share anything else, please put it. Oh, I missed all of those. Let's see. Organization of time, starting projects and early and getting organized, remaining calm when frustrated. Oh my gosh, Pamela, and Cameron, I know what you're talking about. Getting started on assignments, curbing the impulsivity. Yes. Not dumping things on the floor as they enter the house. That would be very nice. And making low stakes decisions without stress. Oh, that's a good one, Mary. Oh no, that wasn't Mary. Sorry, that was Amy. Mary says, enabling my kids to be more organized at school, making better use of their time. This is like an excellent list. It's a master list. So let's talk a little bit about each of these areas that we've talked about before. But before I do, it's a good segue. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to plant the seed, and we'll have time to talk about this later, that this is our specialty. One of our specialties at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space is executive functions. And we have created our own programs specifically for our junior and senior kids. The juniors are the grades 6 to 8, and the seniors are the grades 9 to 12. We do group classes that are for the younger ones, the juniors in person and the seniors are online. And we do one-to-one classes working specifically on the areas of need of that particular child, or we at the group classes, we're looking at a wide range of things like how to use your agenda, how to break up your project into smaller pieces, how to keep your binders tidy and organized, as well as some of the emotional control aspects too. So we're going to talk about that later, but I'm just planting the seed right now. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about working memory. So this is one of the executive functions that I find really, it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. When you have a weak working memory, it affects many, many things, not just your academics, but it affects your whole life. And it can affect you socially as well as emotionally and in your daily tasks. So here's one of the common challenges that we see. Items left at home or at school. They're just not where the child needs them to be or not where we need them to be. So what are some of the things that we like to talk about and encourage our students to do? First of all, we like checklists. We love checklists, and we like to post checklists in many, many places. So if we're talking about things that you need to bring home from school for a younger student, I might, a younger student even who doesn't read yet, but is forgetting their shoes or their lunchbox or their coat, we might make a picture of that item. We might laminate it, punch a hole in it and attach it to a ring on their binder, or not their binder, on their knapsack. Now, that's more of a problem if they don't bring their knapsack home, but it's there as a visual reminder. We might put a list by the front door or in a child's locker of the things that they need to either take to school or bring back from school. We want to keep things really visual, because when somebody sort of sees that note or that picture, or that it's a visual reminder, and it's that little cue to be like, oh yeah, right, I have to bring home my agenda, I have to bring home my homework accordion file, whatever it is. Using your phone for older students is really, really important, and being able to set reminders on your phone. So I sometimes will have my daughter set a reminder at 4:15 when she lets out of school. She has a reminder that goes off that says, please bring home your math homework so that we can work on it tonight. Or anything that again is a visual or a vibration reminder. There are also some really great watches that have reminder. You can set them with reminders and they vibrate at the same time. So lots of different things that you can use to spark your memory. Let's move on to the next one because I've got some other pictures to show you. So if we can't remember what is for homework, if we are not, of course, using that agenda, there are some things that we can do to help our kids become, let's say, more comfortable with it. Most students have phones. Most classrooms don't allow the phones to be used in the classroom, but if your child does have a diagnosed LD or a diagnosed executive functioning challenge, then you can make arrangements in some schools for the student to take a picture of the board before they leave. And I find that our handheld devices, our tablets and our phones are with us a lot of the time. So if we can pull out our phone and take a picture of the board before we leave, it's a quick way to reference. And for somebody who has dysgraphia or has trouble writing things down, or just wants to get out the door really quickly because it's the end of the day, this is a quick way to do it. And then when you get home, you can have your child either upload that to something like OneNote or Evernote, and keep a homework file on the computer as well as a paper agenda. Now, I am old school. I strongly, strongly recommend a paper agenda. And the reason for that is because brain research tells us that if we write something down by hand, we have a higher degree of remembering it. There's more chance that we're going to remember it. In fact, we have the most chance of remembering it if we use cursive. Most kids don't know cursive these days, but if we handwrite it versus typing it or texting it to ourselves, the chance of remembering it goes down. So seeing something visually and being able to plot out where you have all of your work and being able to see it in a linear fashion really helps a person understand how time moves. And a lot of kids with executive functioning challenges have a hard time understanding how time works. They think that either they have an enormous amount of time for something, that due date will never come up, or they get overwhelmed with the fact that they have so much to do and therefore they just shut down and they don't want to do any of it. But if we can put it out visually and space it out and show them how much space they have around their assignments, it makes a big difference. So taking a photo of the board, setting up a buddy system may work as well if you've got somebody trusted in the class that your child can connect with as a reminder. There are lots of apps and extensions that you can put on your computer, on your laptop, on your phone. Shared lists of notes. Google Keep is one of our favorites. We use that a lot at the office, where different people can have access to the same document. You can see what's on your child's Google Keep, and it can also work with the Google Classroom suite as well, which is helpful. And now let's talk quickly about the online portals used by the teachers. It could be Adhd, it could be Google Classroom. There are different ones for different schools. Here's the issue with it. Sometimes a school is really great and all the teachers use it, and it's a very easily accessible and it's a working document. It's a living, breathing document that gets updated all the time. Sometimes it is not. And that becomes very frustrating when you go to the Google Classroom, but the assignment that the teacher is talking about is not on there. So several parents actually asked me in their questions, how do I manage if the information isn't accessible to me? So I'm going to say quickly that we need to communicate with the classroom teachers, and we need to make sure that there is a system set up and that the teacher is aware of your child's struggles or the frustrations that they're having or the lack of information that is going back and forth. So setting up those conferences, you're having teacher interviews probably soon in most schools, and having a conversation about how can we as parent, student, teacher, that triangle communicate better, and figuring out with that teacher where do they post the information the most? And if they're not posting it, how can my child get that information ahead of time or digitally so that you can have a copy of it as well? Okay, let's move on for a moment. Here's another let's take a look at planning and prioritization. This is another big part of executive function. So how do we manage a big project? And a few people in the chat mentioned that. How do I get started? How do I stay on top of it? So the first thing that we want to do when we get any assignment sheet is read over that assignment sheet really carefully. And if you are the student, then you want to read it over really carefully. You might have a highlighter with you and highlight the due dates and the main parts of that project that need to be done. And if you're the parent, you want to sit down with your child and read over that assignment sheet out loud. Some students will read very quickly and they'll miss some of the important or the salient details of that assignment sheet. Then they'll go off and do some work on their own. But when they come back to you to share what they've done, they may have gotten off track because they didn't read the whole thing from beginning to end. So once you've read the entire assignment sheet, and this goes for all grades, even through high school and even into university, you want to make a list of all of the tasks. So often what we do is we take a separate sheet, either by hand or we type it out, and we will create our own checklist. And that checklist may include due dates and then all the things that are due under that due date. And then the next part of the project and that due date and the next and the next. And so what we're doing is breaking up the project into smaller pieces, but also making sure that we're not forgetting about the little details. The other thing that we teach in our courses and in our one-on-one work is backwards planning. And that is taking that big project with all of its due dates and looking at from the end backwards to the beginning and knowing how to break it up into small pieces and giving yourself a due date. If your teacher hasn't broken the assignment up for you or for your child, you've got to do it for them and with them or for yourself. Because if you just look at the end due date and you might think, oh, that's easy, no problem, I can do that in 2 nights. But in fact, when you read through all the details, there are many, many, many steps. You want to give yourself enough time to do it. So let's take a look at the next slide. I think this is sort of an example of a backwards planning process. So we've got the health presentation is due on November 22nd. We are starting 3 weeks ahead, and we're taking all of the pieces, and we're not only assigning a day to do those pieces, but we're also putting a time estimate in there too. So I'm going to do research for an hour. It's going to take me an hour and a half to make some notes. And this is where metacognition or this reflection comes in, because if you think something, reading one article or one, finding some research pieces online may take you an hour, but it actually takes you 3 hours. You need to monitor that for yourself, or that child needs to monitor that for themselves and be able to adjust their time accordingly for the rest of it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, before I get to sorting out the junk drawer, I'm going to ask, are there any questions so far about the things that we've talked about, working memory and planning and prioritizing? Anybody have any comments or questions? You can put it in the chat. All right, I'll give you a moment to think about that. If something comes up for you, don't be afraid, put it in the chat. But for now, I want you to look at this picture. This is a picture of a real junk drawer, okay? I'm gonna pause. Let's see, Sarah, what does Sama say? Sama says, I can't get my new message. What if your teenager does not work with you? As in not work well with you? That is not uncommon. It is, I think, probably even myself as a consummate educator, I also need to step back sometimes when I'm working with my own kids. But one of the things that I like to say is, often you have to have a conversation with your child, especially if you're butting heads. 2 things have to happen. You have to have a conversation and step back, and that conversation should not take place in the middle of the heated debate or the work period. So we kind of have to front load it, which is, I know sometimes it gets frustrating, and I know sometimes maybe you think I don't understand where you're coming from, or I'm not understanding what you're trying to explain to me. I know things get heated, but what can we do when we work together to make it easier? What would be easier for you? You can ask your child. And then sometimes that's when you need to take the step back and bring somebody else in to work with your child on those particular things that cause the most heat, because you want your relationship with your child to be a happy one. And when every homework session ends in tears, could be our own as parents, or it could be our kids, then it's not pleasant and it's not helpful and it's not actually moving us forward. So there are different things that we can set up ahead of time. If it's really not working, it's a good time to bring somebody else in to be working with them. But in those moments where it's not a work period, maybe you can take a step back and talk about it calmly, over a hot chocolate or a walk in the park or somewhere where it's not in that zone. Okay, let's go back to this idea of, oh, you're welcome, Sama. Let's go back to the idea of organization. So flip back to that picture of a junk drawer for a second, Joelle. So here's a junk drawer, actual junk drawer. And I look at this and I have many emotions. And I want you to think about, you can put it in the chat if you want, or just think to yourself, what are your emotions? What do you feel when you see this junk drawer? I'm curious, because many different people have different emotions. Sometimes, depending on my mood, I might look at that picture and think, oh yes, I've got a challenge. Oh, there you go. So Amanda Robbins says, I want to sort it. Exactly. That's how I feel sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all those things. They could be grouped so nicely together. I could put all the pens in one box and the pencils in another box and all the glue sticks in another box. And then somebody else, Amanda says, defeat. Like, it's overwhelming. It's too much. I don't even know where to begin. And I like this picture because it's, and your answers are completely honest and completely true. We're polarized. It's like some people look at it as a challenge and an opportunity, and other people look at it as a defeat. It's completely overwhelming. I just don't even want to look at it or open it. So I bring this picture up because I think that a lot of times when we go to start a project, or when we're working with our kids may feel this kind of defeat as well. Like, this is how it feels like in the brain when they've got this big assignment, but they don't know how to break it down into smaller pieces. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about organization. And organization is challenging for many, many people. It's something that once it's established, can be so helpful. It can actually be a game changer to be able to find the things that you want to find quickly and easily and without stress. So here are some of our top picks for loose papers, for example. An accordion file folder, which is, it's thick. It has sort of accordion sides. It's got a tab on the front that keeps all the papers together. And when you open it, it has slots for each different subject. So I like to recommend this for each subject. You label each slot with a different subject, and then any loose papers that come from school, you're training your kids. Again, it's going to take some practice, but you're going to train them to put the right papers in the right slot. Now, realistically, what happens with that accordion file is that everything gets jammed into the first slot. But that's okay, because at least it goes somewhere. Then the next step is to take that pile of jammed papers and lay it out on the table in piles. So we're going to look for all the math pages. We're going to put them in one pile. We're going to look for all the literacy pages in another pile, all of the science pages in another pile. And then we're going to slot them into their appropriate places. So we're doing this with our kids so that they are watching and they are learning. And we do this with our students all the time. And sometimes it takes, maybe just a few weeks before they catch on and they start doing the same thing on their own. Sometimes it takes several years before they catch on and they're putting it in the right place. Sometimes it takes a very long time for them to realize how helpful it is until, that they can find something when they're looking for it, but it does happen. The other thing I like to do is always have, where is it? My hole puncher. Oh my gosh, I love hole punchers because so many sheets in school are photocopied and they don't punch the holes for the students. So they're handed out with no holes. And then if you do have a 3-ring binder, they just get, again, shoved in the front or the back or the bottom of the bag. So having a 3-hole punch at home can actually be a game changer for your complete happiness in organization, because it allows you then to put those things away where they belong. Color coding binders is another trick of ours. So let's say you have a different color for each subject or group of subjects. Maybe a high school student has a 2-day schedule. So they might have a day 1 binder, which is one color, and a day 2 binder, which is another color. And then they may have some matching folders that you can put, again, those loose papers in. But trying to keep things consistent, and even keeping things consistent from year to year, can be really helpful. So that's loose papers and how to corral them. Even if they don't end up in their right slots every day, but you take one, probably 10 minutes to, usually it's for us, it's about 10 minutes. We work with our students. As I said, we get them to dump out their bag, dump out their binders, whatever loose papers they can collect. We take 5 minutes to put them into their respective piles, and then they get hole punched and put into their binders. Now, when the binders get to be too full, which happens also usually at the end of the term, then we suggest that you use a standing file, either a file folder, like in a file drawer with the same subject names, or you put on your desk a standing file folder. It's like a plastic box that has file slots in it. And again, use the same color coding and use the same subject names, so that when the binder gets too full, it's not just shoved in a drawer, it's actually put specifically in one place. Now, these things take time, they do take practice, and they take effort, but the effort does pay off in the end. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Here's another common issue that we see, a messy desk or a messy locker. So same thing. If we have a place for the things that we need and we use often, and we know that that's always the place that we come back to find them or to put them away, it makes a huge, huge difference. A visual reminder of what an organized desk or locker looks like is great. Take a picture, print it out, post it somewhere where you have the organizational problem, and then use that picture as a reference to put things back so that we know what it's supposed to look like in the end. I got that idea from my husband's aunt, actually, who was an excellent organizer. And she had a hutch where she kept all of her china and all of her entertaining things. And when she would, have people over for dinner, she would get very anxious because she was afraid she would not put it back in exactly the same place that it came from. So her granddaughter had this brilliant idea. She said, "Grandma, just take a picture of the way you like it, and then keep that picture in the hutch for the next time you take things out. You'll know where to put it back." And it was like, it changed her anxiety level threefold. And she was actually able to have more people over longer periods of time because it was less anxious for her. So other things to keep things controlled, baskets, containers, we all know about those things. But I think one of the most important things is there has to be consistency in cleaning it out. And that's where that weekly school locker clean out or desk clean out has to happen, where again, everything comes out, dump it out, put it into the piles of things that are the same, and then you put it back where it belongs. And from one Friday afternoon to the next Friday afternoon, it might end up looking the same on a Friday, but that maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that child has the opportunity to, walk into a locker that makes sense to them, that isn't overwhelming. Okay, let's look at the next one. Oh, we have another take a moment. What am I asking you to do now? Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about is getting out the door in the morning, because as I said earlier, that's like it's tough. It's tough to get out in the morning. And I only have one kid going to school. I've got a 29-year-old and a 12-year-old, and it's still tough to get the 12-year-old out. So in 3 words or less in the chat, can you put down, describe what getting out the door in the morning is like at your house? 3 words or less. Ready, set, go. I'm waiting. Do, 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 do. We've got one new message. What does it say? Oh gosh. Yeah, yelling, stress, panic, chaos and exasperation, tight time routine. All right, Stacey Jacobs, I might have to come back and talk to you about that. You're going to share your secrets. Carrie says pretty calm. Amy says drama, drama, drama. So we're getting both sides of it: annoying, loud and inconsistent, slow, lots of repeating, playing on the phone. Oh, yes, 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 yes. I think for the most part, it's stressful. For some people, they've worked out their routine, they've got it down to a science, and it's taken that stress away. So let's talk a little bit about that. Time management. Let's look at the next slide, Joelle. So slow at getting ready in the morning. One of my favorite things is this timer, and it's called the timed timer. And if you haven't heard about it or seen it, and you have either issues yourself or with your kids of understanding time, understanding really what it means to say we have to leave in 5 minutes, or we have 15 minutes to complete this task, this time timer is going to be your best friend. So what happens is you turn the dial and you set that red film. That red film goes to the maximum amount of time that you're setting. So if you set it for 45 minutes, you're going to see a red film of 45 minutes. And as the time ticks away, that red film disappears until all you see, as it gets to 0, you'll get down to no red film. It is the most amazing visual representation of time that I've ever seen. And it really helps kids, especially those with executive functioning, ADHD, issues with even telling time. It changes their perspective of time because they can see very clearly how much time they actually have left. And one of our teachers, Susan, actually, who's been with us for many, many years, and she has a 7-year-old, I think, Sarah's 7 now. She said, I've used the time timer with my students all the time. I never thought to use it at home. She said she bought one for her house. It changed her life, and that it made everything clearer, and they were being able to get out the door much faster and with much less nagging, because she didn't have to say, you've only got 5 minutes left, you've only got 3 minutes left, you've only got 2 minutes left, because her daughter could actually see that time moving and disappearing. Let's look at the next slide. Another thing that I really like is some kind of a visual reminder of steps. What do we do first? So this is our morning schedule. We're going to eat breakfast, put on our shoes, put on a coat, put on our backpack, get in the car. Each of those things is a step, but instead of nagging and recalling and reminding, all you need to do is point to the schedule. Okay, we did this, check. Let's do the next thing. What do you think we need to do next? So for younger students, this is a really great reminder. For older students, of course, this type of visual may be a little juvenile, but there are, I'm sure that you could make your own that would appeal to them, or have them make their own. That's even better when a student has the buy-in because they've created it. Something else that I like to do is set a playlist, a musical playlist. So let's say that you've got 10 minutes to leave the house at a certain time. If you set a playlist that is exactly 10 minutes, your family will know that, as we've done 1 song, 2 songs, 3 songs. By the time we get to the 4th song, we should be out the door already. And not only does it add some fun and some levity in the morning if you choose the right music, but it picks up the spirits, and it picks up the positive energy if you choose the right music. So setting your morning playlist will help to keep things moving, and know where you're supposed to be at different songs, especially for kids who love music. I guess the challenge would be finding music that everybody enjoys working with. Okay, let's look at the next one. But before we do, I'm going to go back. Lori says, we thought the time timer didn't work at first. Turns out my resourceful 6-year-old was changing the time when I wasn't looking. I finally wised up and put it on a shelf out of reach. Now it really does work. Thank you, Lori. Yes, I love that. That's a success story. That's quite hilarious. Very resourceful. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about time management and missed deadlines. So this is a real problem for a lot of students because they may or may not even remember. They may not remember that there is a deadline. They may have written it down, but they haven't checked it. They may not have heard that there's a deadline. There are a whole bunch of reasons why somebody might miss a deadline. So some of the things that we want to do, of course, is go back to that agenda, using that paper agenda, taking 5 minutes at the end of the day and going through, okay, what do you have to do today? What do you have coming up this week? We're looking ahead at the weekend, and you know you've got a birthday party and you've got piano lessons. So when are we going to fit that studying for the math test in? That conversation with the agenda open or the screen open allows for the student to practice those cognition, those metacognition skills again, of looking at what they have to do and figuring out how are they going to adjust themselves or their working habits in order to get stuff done. So if you have a child who's missing deadlines on a regular basis, you've got to communicate with the teacher. That's number one. You've got to say, look, we're really struggling with this. How can I get the information as well so that I can support my child in knowing when things are due? It's very demoralizing, you know, when you walk into class and you're hit with a test that you didn't even know was supposed to be there, and maybe it was a genuine lack of remembering or just not hearing at the moment. But whatever it is, it affects you and affects your self-esteem, and it causes a lot of stress. So using all of our tools, agenda, talking with the teacher, setting reminders on your personal devices, all of these things will help with the missed deadlines. But I think the most important thing is that 5 or 10 minutes a day of looking at what's coming up for that night and what's going to happen in the next few days, just thinking ahead. Todoist, there's a picture of Todoist on there, which is an extension or an app that we can use that helps us. It sets reminders, and it keeps a running list of what we need to do. And if we don't complete the task that day, then it gets moved to the next day's calendar. So it's a running list. And as we complete things, we cross them off, and then they disappear and they don't come back. All right, let's look at the next one. Time management. Here is an example of a Google Calendar. I like the online calendars because you can color code them, and you could even have different colors for different family members, or if it's one person's schedule, different colors for different subjects, which I find really helpful. And you want to be able to put on other things, not just assignments and due dates, but things like piano lessons and soccer practice, and when you're going for grandma's birthday party, so that a child can actually, again, visually see that there may not be as much time as they think there is, and therefore they've got to use that block of time that they have well. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. So now we're getting into the response inhibition and emotional control side of executive functions. And a lot of kids who struggle with response inhibition will blurt things out in class. And it can be disturbing to their classmates. It can be disturbing to the teacher. The classmates could get annoyed. And then, of course, it starts to affect their self-confidence or their ability to participate in class. So one thing, there's a little poster here that we have some rules, right? The red is an emergency, like this is something that you do have to say right away, something you would need to tell the teacher right away. The yellow is that caution, like I've got to raise my hand and wait. This is when you have a question. And then the green is where you have to keep your thoughts in your head until free time, which is really hard. I had a student who would just love to tell me the most wonderful, curious things that would pop into his head. And we had a system that if he was about to say something, and I could tell he was about to say something that was not based on what we were talking about in the moment, I would just hold up my finger and I would smile and I would say, is it something that relates to what we're doing right now? And he'd think and he'd say, no. And I'd say, okay, hold it for 5 minutes and then I'll give you a moment to talk about it when we're done this section. But often, that reframing, we're not dismissing what they have to say. We just want them to hold on to it for a little while longer till it's an appropriate moment. And again, this is a skill and it does take practice and it will mature over time, but we have to be active in that practice and give our students, again, some explicit instructions on how do I control myself? So here are some ways. We can count backwards from 10. If we know it's not something that I should be blurting out, I can count backwards from 10. I can keep a little tally of the amount of times that somebody blurts something out, and then we can watch that tally go down over time, hopefully, as we're practicing these different things. But the idea is to self-monitor and to learn how to self-monitor and to learn to ask yourself, do I need to say that right now? Is that really important for this moment, or can I hold on to it? Okay, let's look at the next one. Emotional control, that's angry outbursts, meltdowns, getting, being highly sensitive, the drama of things. And a lot of the emotional control and the response inhibition are things that we do need to be practicing with our kids or ourselves outside of that heated moment. So we want to be practicing some deep breathing. One deep breathing technique I use with kids is smell the flower, blow out the candle, so that they are practicing that deep breath in and deep breath out. Another good one that I use personally at the end of the day, just to decompress, is what I call the 3 square. So I breathe in for 3 counts, I hold it for 3 counts, I breathe out for 3 counts, and then I hold it for 3 counts. And I only repeat this 3 times, but that cycle of breathing in, holding, breathing out, and holding will actually relieve the cortisol levels, those high stress levels, that high stress emotion and neurochemical transmitter. And it brings things down to a place where I just go, okay. And truthfully, 3 counts of 4 is 12 times 3 is only 36 seconds. It takes 36 seconds to take that moment and just release it. But again, you have to practice it before the drama moment so that you can bring it back in and help your child through that. Squeezing a stress ball, having a signal with the teacher for an emotional outburst, and then having them have a quiet space. Like, okay, I see you need to take a break. Why don't you go in and go to the reading corner? Or why don't you go sit on the comfy chair? It shouldn't be a punishment, but there does need to be a space, a zone where that child can feel safe, that they can just take a moment and regain their composure. All right, let's look at the next one. This is emotional zones of regulation. This is something that occupational therapists use a lot and social workers use a lot. It is a program that talks about the different zones of, being in the green zone is the place that you want to be. The red zone is where you definitely don't want to be, but you also want to know when you're in the blue, the moving slowly zone, and the yellow, the frustrated, worried, excited, losing some control zone. So we teach students how to identify where they are and then to be able to talk about it. And as they talk about it, again, they're using that metacognition so that they're able to move themselves from one place to the next. And it also gives you a language. If you're using this kind of system, it gives you a language to use with your children or with yourself to be able to identify where they're at and what they need to get to the next place. So that reflection. All right, let's moving on. I think we're almost done. Here's one little tidbit for sustained attention. And sustained attention is that ability to focus and to follow through on something without getting distracted. So we've already talked tonight about chunking out smaller tasks, breaking it into small pieces, giving yourself a deadline for that small piece, using a timer. I have to say that I use my timer all the time for things. Just to get me started. Like if I have something that I need to get done, writing an email or responding to somebody, but I'm procrastinating or I'm dragging my heels, I will set the timer for 10 minutes and say, okay, I'm just going to work on it for 10 minutes. I'm going to see what I can get done in 10 minutes. And usually by the time 10 minutes rolls around, I'm into it and I'm able to complete it. You may need to break down your time into, 2 10-minute chunks and take a break in between, or 20-minute chunks, or whatever it is. But using a timer can be really motivating. When you're giving your child help to stay focused, just 1 or 2 directions at a time. Don't give them everything, just 1 step or 2 steps at a time. First do this, and when you're done this section, come back and see me, and then you're going to do the next 2 questions. Sometimes I even like to visually cover the rest of the questions. Let's say they've got 10 math questions to do and it's just overwhelming and they're having a hard time staying focused on it. I will cover the rest of the questions and just show 1 or 2 at a time. They work on that, and then I'll slide the paper down and then they'll work on that. It visually is less cluttered and therefore less overwhelming. There are some digital on-task tools like Stay Focused, which is you can block certain websites so that you're only showing, you're only on certain pages for a certain amount of time, and it doesn't allow you to go on Facebook or Roblox or whatever else it is. So you as a parent can set that for your child or for yourself too. And then breaks. Let's quickly talk about breaks. Breaks are important, but a break should be active or something, nourishing. Have a little bit of protein, go for a walk, play on a bouncy ball, or in the office, we have lots of balls and different things that students are active with when they take their breaks, so that you're getting a break from the work that you're doing, but you're also creating endorphins and getting the blood flowing so that you can concentrate more when you sit down. And in fact, another little tidbit, there's a lot of research about exercise before you start to do your work. If you can do 20 minutes of exercise, walking, running, jumping up and down, jumping jacks, taking the dog for a walk, playing basketball, 20 minutes of exercise before you sit down to concentrate will allow you to concentrate longer, especially if you have concentration issues. So if you can take that few minutes, that 15 to 20 minutes, before you sit down to do the task that you're procrastinating about, it may actually help you get through it faster. All right, what's next? Oh, here is where I'm going to take a couple of more questions. If you've got questions for me, put them in the chat. We've got a lightning round. So lightning round means that I'm going to try and answer really quickly and then move on to the very last part of our presentation for tonight. Carrie says, I'm just going back. Carrie says, why can't my kids understand or time or tell time? And she has these timers. Well, time is a really elusive thing for some people. And it's like something that it's not tangible. You can't hold on to it. It just kind of goes. So we sometimes need to take a different approach of teaching time or telling time. Sometimes in those cases, what's it called? The digital clock is easier than the analog clock, but I like to see the time moving. So we can talk about that further if you want to hang on. Difference between ADHD, ASD, and executive function. Oh my gosh, that is not a lightning round question, Carrie. That's like a whole other presentation. All right. Difference between ADHD and ASD. Well, ADHD is attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, which is really looking at the brain, how the chemicals of the brain allow us to sustain our attention and use our executive functions. ASD is autism spectrum disorder, which has a lot of crossover and can look very similar, but has a whole other set of criteria that ADHD does not have. Executive functions, oh man, this is like a thesis question. Executive functions are affected in both of those situations. So somebody with ADHD is most likely going to have challenges with executive functions, and somebody on the ASD spectrum will also most likely have issues with executive functions. But you can also have executive functioning disorder completely by itself without the other two. So there's like a Venn diagram, right, where all of these things cross over, and because they're all affected by the same or controlled by the same part of the brain, and if that part of the brain is working differently, then those issues are going to show up and be crossed over in many different places. Okay, anybody else have a question for me? You can throw them in the chat. I'm going to come back to the questions in a bit too. All right, next, putting it all together. We have talked about a lot of different things, and I hope that by the end of our presentation, you're going to walk away with 1, 2 or a dozen new ideas that you can put into practice at home. Keep in mind that whatever executive function you want to work on, don't bite off more than you can chew or that your child can swallow, because you want to take it little step by little step by little step. Target one desired thing that you would like to improve and make a plan with your child. Involve them, discuss it with them, talk about it, find out what's working for them and what's not working for them, and then help them to come up with a solution. You'll be surprised. Our kids are really smart and they know themselves well if we can get them in the right mind frame and we can get them to think about, you may not have this skill yet, or maybe you have it sometimes, but you don't have it others. How can we help you? How can you help yourself get to the place where you can do this consistently on your own? Okay. Again, engage them in the process, whether that means they're making their own agenda charts or visual charts or checklists, or they're coming up with the ideas of how to, to make a situation better. But really engaging them in the process is important because it is their lives and it is for them that we are trying to put all of these supports in place. Complete the routine together multiple times before you expect them to complete the task on their own. So that's that, hand over hand, showing the student where the boots go 20 times, 30 times, 40 times. And then one day you're going to come home and the boots are going to be in the right spot and you're going to weep because it's so exciting. Make accommodations if necessary. So if something isn't working, maybe our expectations for that moment are just too high. Bring them down a bit, bring it back so that your child can feel success, and then move the barometer, move the bar forward just a little bit, one step at a time. And give your child the space to achieve independence. Sometimes that means a struggle. And sometimes we do have to sit in the dark and uncomfortable bits in order to get to the other side. And sometimes it is so hard to watch our kids trying to tie their shoe over and over again and getting frustrated and not being able to do it. If we jump in there every time and tie the shoe for them, they're not going to learn how to tie their shoe. So we do need to step back a little bit at a time and give them that space to feel success. And lots of visual cues, reminders, whether they're visual or they're on a vibrating watch or they're on our devices, but those cues that remind us, oh, it's time to do something or it's time to remember something is really important. Okay, next one. So all of the things that we talked about today are really important for the future. These are skills that we said develop over time. And remember that prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until age 25 or older. So we cannot expect our 8-year-olds to be as proficient at organizing and managing their own time as we are. But we can give them skills and we can support them in their learning as they get to that place over time. Let's look at the next one. I think the next one talks about what we can do. So if you are looking for a program for your kids or some one-on-one work to help your kids or yourself through these executive functioning challenges, that's what we do. We're experts at it. And not only can we provide the programs one-to-one, but we also have small group programs. Our next group programs are running for March break. And as I said, I think the Power Planners Junior grade 6 to 8 will be in person at our office in Toronto. The Power Planners Senior for grade 9 to 12, which includes note-taking and some really great skills that they will need to transition to university. They will be available online. And at any time, we can do the one-on-one executive functioning programs that are catered to the specific needs of your child. And we will work with the classroom teacher, we will work with a psychologist, we will work with you, and we will give you lots of strategies in order to implement things at school and at home to make your lives easier, which is what we all want, isn't it? All right, let's look at the last slide. Oh, questions. Questions. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions that they want to share? If you don't have a question, I would love it if you could just pop into the chat one thing or more that you learned or discovered or rediscovered from tonight's presentation. It really helps me to understand what's valuable to you. Here's a question. Does anyone grow out of executive function challenges? I would say that things change over time. and that as a child matures into a young adult and then into an adult, if they are active in practicing techniques and strategies, they can become extremely organized, extremely on top of things, and extremely functional. When they come up against a new challenge, they may have to, again, rejig and figure out a new strategy that's going to meet this new challenge. It's something that doesn't necessarily go away, but it definitely makes, it improves. It improves over time, and it improves with practice and with patience and with consistency. So thank you for that, Dorothy. And what else have we got? Amanda says more information on how EF challenges manifest in different age groups. Oh, I'm glad that you found that helpful. That's great. Pamela says, thanks for the tips. Lisa says tools to assist with functioning. For example, Todoist and Google Keep. And Stacy says, thank you so much, Ruth. This was wonderful. I always love attending your informative webinars. Thank you, Stacy. I love to have you here. That's so wonderful. Keep them coming. If there's anything else or any other questions that you have, this is really an overview, right? Like if I could have 5 hours or 5 days, I would love to tell you more and more and get really granular and give you all the tips that we use. But of course, I don't have that time in an evening webinar. So you're just going to have to call me and ask me your questions if you wish privately. Let's see. Oh, we had another question. Where did it go? I just saw that. Hold on. Will in-person sessions resume soon for vaccinated kids? Oh, thank you for asking that, Cameron. Yes, we have begun to bring in small groups of vaccinated kids, yes, and we are starting to open up more and more week over week. So we've got our system down, we tested it out, we know how it's working, we've got all of our safety protocols in place, and if you are interested in returning to in-person, give the office a call or send us an email, info@ruthrumac.com, because yes, we are ready to see kids in person. And now that we know that the younger ones are also going to get vaccinated shortly, we will be seeing even more kids, more of our younger kids too. So I'm really pleased to say that, and thank you for asking me. So let's see, Diana says, fantastic, as always, and very informative. Thank you. And Amy, thanks, Ruth. Great webinar. Awesome. And Liza says, what is the junior height? Oh, Joelle answered. Do you want to know the prices for the executive functioning, both the junior and for the senior? So it's $275 for the junior and $350 for the senior. And those are online. It's a 10-hour course. And over March break, I believe it's 2 hours at a time. With breaks and with lots of activities, and our courses are always full of activity. You know, we really take the idea of active learning and kinesthetic learning to its fullest. So the course is a lot of hands-on stuff and teaching skills and practicing skills in real time. Well, if nobody has any other questions, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And we have our next webinar is next week, actually on Thursday, and it's called Raising a Reader. So for those of you who have younger kids at home, you know, anywhere from age 0 through to probably about 8 or 10, we are going to be talking about raising active readers and how to set the stage for strong readers, or if you've got a struggling reader at home, what to do in order to give them the boost that they need. I really love doing these. I love hearing from you. Keep in touch, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. If there's anybody who would like to stick around, I'll be here to answer your questions. But have a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon. Oh, thank you, Amanda. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm so glad. I also should mention that if we will be sending out a review, not a review, what do we call it? A questionnaire. So if you want to give us your comments and your feedback, we love feedback so that we can change the format or change what we're talking about. We really want these webinars to be valuable to the people who are listening. So we really appreciate your feedback, and anytime you can give it, I take it to heart. I read all of them myself. All right, I'm sticking around for another couple of minutes to see if anybody has any more questions. Questions? Carrie, both my kids struggle. I just had to get on with it. Maybe not the best, but hey, why is EF now a thing? It's interesting you say that. We've been talking about executive functions. Like I've been talking about it for 20 years. And it's just now starting to become popular and people know what I'm talking about when I say executive functions. Literally 5 or 6 years ago, I was educating everybody that I was talking to. They could recognize it when I described it, but they didn't know it had a name. Why is it now a thing? I think it's sort of this understanding of ourselves and the fact that ADHD is no longer, and ASD is really out in the forefront. We know we talk, it's not about being normal and not normal. We talk about being neurotypical and not neurotypical. And now we have language to describe these things. And we have a lot of brain research behind it that explains how our brains work and what works best for certain situations. So I'm so glad that people are talking about it now. I'm sorry that, people had to struggle through it and be called lazy and be called unmotivated. And it really does break my heart, actually, when I hear those stories of either educators or, parents in ignorance, not knowing how to deal with it. And, but now we do know how to deal with it. So we're going to make the best of it. Oh, thank you, Althea. You sent our contact to your son's teacher and principal. Thank you very much. We love to talk with other educators and share what we do. Actually, that's a good thing to say, that I make myself available for all kinds of speaking engagements. So if you have a parents group that you wanted me to talk to, or a mom's group, or something through your school, I'm happy to discuss the different types of things that I can talk about and share what I know. That's what I love to do, is share what I know. All right, anybody else would like to weigh in? We've got a couple people still around. Anybody else have any more questions for me? And I'm serious about, if there's something that you want to know or something that comes to mind later on, pick up the phone, send us an email. We're really happy to respond and to share our information. If you want to pick my brain about something, let me know. I'm here. All right. Who else has a question? We still have a couple of people hanging on. Anybody? Amanda, Carrie, Lori, MA? Anybody want to ask a question? All right. Oh, I got one new message popping up. Carrie says, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. And you know what? Good on you. I know struggling through these things is challenging, and especially when you've got kids who are experiencing the pain, and you're experiencing the pain with them. But I'm sure that you've done a lot right, and I'm sure that they've gathered a lot of good skills over the years. Thank you, everybody, and we will be in touch soon. Hope to see you at our next webinar. See you later. Bye-bye.